Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chris Bottger's Album Club. Now, for those of you who don't remember, we've done an episode like this before. In it, basically, at the beginning, I announced two albums we are going to be listening to, then we listen to them, and we give our final thoughts on them. But before we do that, I, of course, have to announce the albums and kind of us give our predictions on whether or not we think we'll like them. Now, today, with me, I have Ben,
Get ready for Dumbo!
Matthew, and Santiago.
Hi, I introduce myself like a normal person. Hello, guys.
um, So yeah, now I'm going to be announcing the two albums that we're going to be listening to. Today's picks are Scream by Siouxsie and the Banshees, not an album I've listened to before, and From Genesis to Revelation, the first album by the band Genesis. So I'll start with you, Ben. What are your thoughts on these albums here going into this?
I have never listened to them. I've heard of those bands. I know those bands. I've heard songs by those bands. Do I know those albums? No. Right offhand, I don't even know if I know any songs off of those albums. But the Genesis one, that's a Peter Gabriel one, right?
Yeah, it's the very first Genesis album.
Yeah, I don't know if I know any songs from Ben. Um, I mean, I know Genesis and I know Peter Gabriel, but
I do know several of the Peter Gabriel songs, but mostly from the later albums, not the first one, which it's my understanding sold very poorly from when it came out. So I will say I am very unfamiliar with these albums as well. I've not heard either of these albums before. I don't think I've heard any song on either of these albums before. So I think me and Ben are certainly on the same page here. Matthew, what are your thoughts?
I have never heard a Genesis album. I I've heard of Susie and the Banshees because one of my favorite music people has done a sample of a Susie and the Banshee song, but I have never heard a Susie and the Banshee album. I have only heard one Genesis song, but I'm going in blind in this one.
I have to ask
I've heard
Matthew. Matthew, I have to ask. What is the one
Sure.
Genesis song that you're referring to?
Oh, really? Let me see. Misunderstanding.
Oh, that's a pretty good song, but I will say that is later Phil Collins Genesis. It's a bit more prog
Uh,
rock. What we're looking at with early Genesis is the Peter Gabriel Genesis, which is more prog rock. It's kind of more like Pink Floyd or something like that. I haven't listened to this particular Genesis album. This is the first one from way back in 1969. But I have listened to some of the early 70s Peter Gabriel Genesis stuff, and it doesn't really sound all that much like the Phil Collins Genesis stuff. Certainly not the 80s Phil Collins Genesis stuff, so uh, I certainly expect something different from this album, and I would if I were you too. Santiago, what are your thoughts on these two albums?
Well, especially on the Banshees, I don't know about that band or group, whatever. Never heard of it, honestly. So I'm going blind with it. I know, of course, Genesis, though. But I also I have never heard a whole album from Genesis. So I'm quite curious to listen to this one. And also Susie and the Banshees, I'm very curious to listen to these ones. Since basically I just very unfamiliar with these groups.
Alright, well, this should certainly be a very interesting episode. As I said, I'm completely unfamiliar with both these albums. I have listened to Genesis albums before, but they're Phil Collins Genesis. This is Pure Gabriel Genesis, and I do listen to some Pure Gabriel Genesis, but usually the albums after this. This is the very earliest point of Genesis. This is the only album of the 1960s, so that should certainly be very interesting. Susie and the Banshees, I don't listen to as much punk as I think like Ben does. Um, so this should be interesting
or
too.
even me.
or even Matthew. Um, so it should be very interesting for me to kind of develop my thoughts on both these albums and maybe try to figure out what I think the best song on them all, because I don't know any of the songs from either of these albums, if you know what I mean. So that should certainly be very interesting. Anyone else have anything else to say before we move on?
I have actually heard one of the songs on the screen.
Which one?
Not
I
really
could,
what it is, though. But I have.
Oh, okay.
I could feel it coming in the air tonight.
That's technically Phil Collins' solo, not Genesis, but I will say, Phil Collins was the drummer for Genesis at the same time as Peter Gabriel was the lead single, but he was not on this first album. I think he joined on their Fjord album, maybe.
So this is gonna color my mood for this album then.
All right. I have no clue what that means, but okay.
Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. Now we are going to go listen to the albums, and then we will be back with our thoughts on the albums. Alright, now we've gone and listened to the albums, and we're going to give our thoughts. So let's start off with Siouxsie and the Banshees. The album's great. Ben, what were your thoughts on this album?
I liked it. I think its second half was better than the first, at least from my perspective. It's a little bit more rocky, I guess. A little bit more punk. I mean, this is like a punk rock album in many ways. It derives directly from the Sex Pistols scene. But I liked this album. I thought that there was like some really strong points in it, especially its second half. The only song on here I had heard before was the cover of Helter Skelter, which is pretty good, though it's not as good as the original, obviously. But I would say the second half, with its like kind of punk elements, and especially like I said, the song "That's a Guess Son" or however it's pronounced, I think are particularly strong. But also just like the portrayal of alienation and nicotine stain, I think was pretty strong. And also Bob Lee with apps. I think this was a strong album overall, but especially in the second half. The first half is more like proto gothic in a way, or maybe even new wavy, which I enjoyed, but I enjoyed the second half more.
Yeah, I'd say it's only with New Wave in some ways. So he certainly liked the album. Ben did. I will say, Matthew, I could open the door and let them in, but if the door was a metal door, I could just eat the door, because, eating metal or whatever. Anyways, up next, Matthew, how do you feel about the album?
Well, Ben said that he liked this album. I said I really, really like this album. So far of this thing we're doing with the album roundtable, with where we're listening to these albums, this is my favorite so far. I didn't know that much of Siouxsie and the Banshees. I only knew of the song "Happy House," which was famously sampled by a Weeknd song, and I just really like this album. That's their first album. It's very like has elements of like punk, gothic, and some say new wave, and just like a really strong album overall. It has the first half is decent, but like as Ben said, the second half is very very strong.
I think, well, it was my first time listening to Susie and the Banshees overall as a band. And this album, I think it was interesting to say the least. Like, I feel it was actually fun to listen into it because I went without expectations about it, but I ended up liking the sound. And as Matthew said, it's like it has this gothic, kind of vibe to it. And that's something, honestly, I like. Like, I usually don't listen that this kind of music, but it was, yeah, it was solid, I would say. And I think it's interesting that to hear this kind of music from the late 70s. I would guess this is some sort of new style that was emerging back then, which is, yeah, as I said previously, interesting. So yeah, I think it was like I will not say I love it. I will not say it's it's like yeah like no, it's not like I love it or is that it's very good. No, like it's just good. Like it's fine. I don't know if I will listen to it again. Yeah, probably. But yeah, I think it was solid. Yeah, comparing the previous albums we reviewed, I think this one it goes to another level here.
All right, so Santiago liked the album. I have to admit, I kind of wasn't expecting that, but very nice. So I guess now it's my turn to give my thoughts on the album, and I'm gonna have to be kind of a voice of dissent here. I didn't particularly hate it or anything, but like I didn't really kill for it either. I wasn't a huge fan of the vocal style employed by Siouxsie Sue. The songwriting was fine in most cases, or it could edge on maybe a little too full on the crass side for me at times, but I think it was generally pretty good there. But yeah, I mean, most of the songs I didn't find all that memorable. I mean, I'd say the most memorable song is Helter Skelter, and it's in my opinion, full inferior cover to the original. We've seen other people do better covers of Helter Skelter than this one. U2, for instance. Uh, and yeah, like, this album overall, I didn't really care for it all that much. As I said, in particular, I didn't like the vocal style employed. I thought Siouxsie Sue's voice was just, maybe it's better once you get used to it, but it just wasn't something that I could really get into. Some of the songwriting was good, I think, but I didn't feel like there was anything in the way of super, competent or flashy musicianship that you could really latch onto instead of vocal evil. So that's just my personal take, though. Once again, if anyone, watching this likes this album, but don't take offense at me saying I didn't really care for it because the people who liked it, and I think it was pretty good at least. I mean, it wasn't really my style, I guess, but I did think it was good. At least the writing, I think, was good. The songwriting. So yeah. Anyone else have anything to say about Scream here at the end?
Yeah, like I just realized there's yeah a cover of Helter Skelter because yeah it's been a while since I heard this album, so now I just realizing like oh yeah okay yeah because Ben was talking about it and I was confused like why he's talking about Helter Skelter, but now yeah now I remember and I have to say that it's I didn't like this cover. I didn't like.
Yeah.
That's all I have to say.
Yeah, well, we're also used to the original, and I will say the cover honestly felt a little out of place. I'd argue that the cover was probably the weakest song on the album, so just because it doesn't really fit in the same way. I mean, as I said, I think one of the stronger parts of the album was in some ways the writing, and that's not written by them, so it doesn't really stand what fits in with the same sort of style. So, all right, moving on, we then have From Genesis to Revelation by Genesis. This is the first album by Genesis, led by Peter Gabriel at this time. So, Ben, what were your thoughts on From Genesis to Revelation?
Um, that was alright. Honestly, I kind of don't remember that much of it anymore. What was I doing when I was doing that? Some sort of walk while listening to it, and I remember it being like there was something I had thought of that like I thought Peter Gabriel was doing interesting on it. What was it? There was something. There was something I thought in one of those like opening songs I thought was kind of interesting. It was like less intensely pop rocky than I was expecting. More. I mean, I guess it is 60s in that sense. Um, it's a good album, I think, but like maybe more folk influences than I was thinking. But I can't say I felt very strongly about it. Otherwise, like it was all right. I should probably go back and re-listen to it.
All right,
Chris,
Matthew.
may I go last?
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get back to Matthew then. Um, Santiago.
Yeah. I think well about this album, like if I know Genesis, but I barely heard other songs before, so it was also my first time listening a whole album from Genesis, and actually I was very excited to dig into it. Like out of the two, the Siouxsie and the Banshees, and this one, I was actually more excited for this one because well, I know Genesis, so I thought I would like this. I will enjoy this. But since I know Genesis from the 80s, so it was interesting when I checked the date of this album, which is 69, and I was like, oh, I didn't know they existed back then, like in the 60s even. So I was very curious for this album, of course. Uh, but honestly, I ended up uh, kind of disappointed. Like if I had to compare to the other album, I would prefer the other album. Like with this one instead, I had like some expectations when when I went to listen to it. So honestly, I I really didn't like this album. Like there's something I don't know. Like the songs are fine. I wouldn't say they are bad songs or anything. But I feel like since it was an album from '69, I will say that they sounded a little bit more like from '67. From the sound from '67 or a little bit more. Few years back. I don't know how to say that, but I don't know. It felt kind of generic, generic sound from the '60s, from late '60s, and I found myself getting bored by listening to it. Like I feel there was not like a song that stood out for me, like that I would say like, oh man, this is really good. Like I have to add this to my list. No, there wasn't like any song. uh, yeah, like I don't want to offend anyone who's listening right now who really likes this one, but I don't know. In my opinion, it wasn't like an album that I have fun listening to it overall.
All right. Well, Matthew took Krista to go last,
Well,
so I can go first. Unless you want to go, Matthew.
sure. Um, yeah, I'm kind of on the same boat as Santiago. I didn't really like this album. I think it's well done, but like Ben, I didn't really um remember all that much of Genesis to Revelation. I jokingly was like, man, this is like, if I wanted to read the Bible, I would read the Bible because like the titles of the songs are very religiously blunt on the title. Like basically the titles of the song is in the beginning, the serpent in the wilderness.
Well, the name of the whole album
in
is
limbo.
From Genesis to Revelation, so.
Yeah, yeah. If you don't know the Bible, you'd be in a shock. But anyway, yeah, I just didn't really care for that album. I don't, it's not a bad album. I would imagine as someone who didn't really listen to that much Genesis, there's probably way better stuff they made. So, kind of a lukewarm thumbs down.
Alright, I'll go next. I personally like this album. I'm going to stand alone here, as I did on the previous album, but actually really liked this album. I liked Sour Tones to Sweet. I liked Am I Very Wrong? I liked In the Wilderness. I liked In Limbo, particularly quite a bit. Silent Sun's pretty good as well. Uh, I thought this was a pretty good album. Like, is it the best thing Genesis has ever done? I don't think so. I mean, Matthew's right there, but I thought it was really good. I kind of liked the folk, almost Baroque in a way, sort of sound they had going on here. This kind of, at times pretty soft, at times pretty sleepy, but still very, vital sound they've got going on. I really like Peter Gabriel's lead vocalist. I've obviously reviewed several of his solo albums, which, mind you, are like 8 years later than this, but still, 8+ years, but still, like, I think it's a pretty good sound they have going on here. Of course, they could build upon it and improve upon it and future, albums, but I do think this is good. I quite like this album. I will say I'm reading this album with relatively low expectations, um, but not super low either. And I came out really liking it. Actually, I think I was pleasantly surprised by it. It was to some degree better than I was expecting. I don't really know why though, since I know I generally like both Genesis and Peter Gabriel solo. So no, I thought this was really solid. So personally, Santiago said it sounded a bit dated. It's just me, but I think all of us here kind of like dated music. So, uh, just saying it. Me, at least personally, I clearly listen to a lot of music that a lot of people consider dated. Yeah, no, I actually kind of like
No,
how
but
this.
like I mean, like if you listen Abbey Road, for example, that she sounds like 69. That doesn't sound like something from the 1670s or anything
To,
like
to
that.
me,
Like
Abbey
the
Road
things
still
were
sounds like
usually
modern.
going by each year, like I don't have problem with outdated music, but I was referring more like that their sound wasn't it didn't sound something like from 69. More, it was more like 67. Doesn't have to necessarily be a bad thing, but I feel it was more like generic, I would say. Like if I wanna hear music from with this kind of sound, I will go for another album and another band instead of listening to this one. You get it?
I agree with that statement. And also I would say like I know what Santiago was saying, but I think I would push back because like I think some of the Beatles stuff it kind of is a weird where it does sound like it's from a different era, but also it sounds timeless.
Yeah, he's right.
Um, because like I think Abbey Road is like still sounds good today.
Yes.
I think
Oh yeah,
stuff,
definitely.
stuff on the
Yeah.
White Album, particularly back in the USSR, sounds good today as it was over 50 years ago. Um, Stuff on Revolver and Sergeant Pepper, But I understand what Santiago was saying.
Yeah. Well, once again, I just want to reiterate. I really like this album. I do kind of want to get it. And I kind of liked the kind of soft, folky, but kind of leaning on prog, kind of baroque in a way, sound to it. I mean, I'm not going to say there weren't better albums that kind of sound similar to it, like something by the Moody Blues, maybe, although kind of on the softer, I guess, less orchestrated end for them. But yeah, I liked this album from Genesis to Revelation. I thought it was really good. So yeah,
Two more things for me.
yeah,
One, I think the biggest reason maybe because I didn't really care for this album because it had no Phil Collins. Although, like, you feel like, well, he was technically doing Genesis later. I know, but it had no Phil Collins. And also, I think, interestingly enough, when I was listening to this album, it reminded me of another Peter Gabriel work that he did. He did the score for well, not directly, not like this doesn't sound the same as the work I'm talking about, but he did the score of one of my favorites Martin Scorsese movies, The Last Temptation of Christ, which is like also like very religiously themed. So, but I way prefer his score on Last Temptation of Christ than from Genesis to Revelation.
Alright, so now we're gonna say which album each one of us liked the best of these two. So, we'll start with Ben.
The Scream. The second half of it was damn good, and I just remember a lot more of it than I do from Genesis to Revelation.
Okay. Matthew. I think we already know what
I'm
you're
go-
gonna say.
I'm gonna go with the third option, and I'm gonna go with "The Queen Is Dead" by the Smiths. No, 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 no. I'm it's obvious. I went with the Scream. I would by Siouxsie and the Banshees. Before we filmed, I even told Ben without me basically saying, I was like, yeah, I have my mind definitely set on which albums that I liked, and that was I preferred the Scream by Siouxsie and the Banshees.
Okay, Santiago's already said, but you want to repeat it, Santiago?
Yeah, I prefer in this case the Scream, of course, because I feel I had more fun listening to it compared Genesis to Revelation.
Alright, and last is me. I will say, I think anyone who's listened to this video knows up at this point that I'm going to go with From Genesis to Revelation. I thought that was a really good album. I feel like of the four albums we've done here on the Album Club before, so far, I feel like it's been my favorite, so that's just me personally. So yeah, I mean, Ben, Matthew, Santiago all voted for The Scream. I'm voting for From Genesis to Revelation, so
One
yeah.
more thing.
Yeah.
Let's do a ranking of the album so far that we uh personally the four of us like which one we like based we rank based on enjoyment.
Of UFO Stranger on the Night, Dookie by Green Day, and then The Scream and From Genesis to Revelation.
Yes.
Well, I'd say personally, I'm thinking it is probably The Scream at the bottom. Then, I don't know, I still liked both Green Day and UFO about the same. I'd probably put then UFO at the bottom, and then Dookie in second, and then at first From Genesis to Revelation.
Ben.
Okay, my opinion on Strangers in the Night is a little bit more solid than from Genesis to Revelation, just because I don't remember much of that one. So I'm gonna put that one at the bottom. From Genesis to Revelation going to the bottom. Then Strangers in the Night. So that's next to last. And then Dookie. And then The Scream. I think that The Scream was like the one here I enjoyed the best.
Alright, Santiago, you want to read off your list?
Yeah, so I will put the very first place to Rookie, but it's also hard for me like to put this one in the first place because I will also put the Scream. So I feel they are a little bit more like tied, with I would say with the level of my enjoyment
Yeah.
listening to these albums.
I'm not too surprised. They're
So
honestly kind of similar albums. I mean, The Scream is kind of a forerunner to Dookie, so.
yeah, so I will put in the first place Dookie, the second place Scream, the third place Genesis to Revelation, and the very last one Strangers in the Night.
I think Ben read off my list. I don't know. Well, I think Ben read off my list because that's basically my list. I put wait, Ben, say your list again.
So at first I had the Scream, then
Okay.
Dookie, and
Mhm.
then Strangers of the Night, just because I remember it somewhat better than the last one from Genesis to Revelation. But those last two are probably pretty valuable.
Mhm. All right. That's what I thought. It's basically my Ben's ranking. I put from Genesis to Revelation. Mainly because I like listening to music. Santiago was saying how he had more fun listening to Scream than from Genesis to Revelation, and I definitely agree with that. Um, this list basically is like how I enjoyed it, and I rather listen to music that to be enjoyed than to be like an obligation, because that means like it's less fun, just like with movies, so on. You rather do something that you can enjoy instead of being like an obligation. And so from Genesis to Revelation, then Stranger Than Night, then Dookie, then Scream.
All right. So yeah, we certainly had very different opinions here. Well, not Ben and Matthew, I guess, but everyone else. So yeah, moving on. I suppose it's
Let's
now.
get to the big question.
Yeah, I suppose it's now time to reveal who put these on the short list. Anyone want to hazard a guess as to who put what on the short list to begin with?
I would imagine that Chris suggested the Genesis album because I think that's more of his style. Maybe Siouxsie and the Banshees was an album that maybe Ben suggested, because I did not suggest either one of these albums.
Anyone else want to hazard a guess? No? Okay. Well, I'll just go ahead and say it. Both of these albums were actually added to the shortlist by me. Um,
Yeah, that was my second guess. That you
yeah,
would
well,
do Siouxsie and Banshees.
I deliberately try to pick things that I know I hadn't heard before that I thought would be interesting to discuss on here, so that's why that ended up on there, even though in the end I didn't really like it all that much, so yeah. And yeah, so Genesis, I liked it. I hadn't heard it before. I know it was the first album by a band though that I'm pretty familiar with, so yeah, I mean, pretty good, pretty good episode I think we have here. And yeah, I'll say, that I want to thank everyone here for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you like this video. We have more episodes of the Album Club coming up monthly. And I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video.